Tonight on Primetime, Ukraine and Russia are trading fresh attacks, even as Moscow says it's ready for peace talks. So, is diplomacy gaining ground, or is the war entering another dangerous phase? Talking peace, trading strikes. Welcome to the program, I'm Andy Miuch. In Ukraine, the war shows little sign of slowing. Fresh drone attacks and strikes have been reported on both sides, with Kyiv targeting Russian military-linked infrastructure and supply routes, while Moscow accuses Ukraine of escalating the conflict. Amid the latest exchanges, Russia's President Vladimir Putin insists Moscow remains ready for peace talks, even as the fighting intensifies.
Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Tuesday that Moscow is still ready for peace talks with Ukraine, but said any deal must reflect previous negotiations and the current battlefield situation. Speaking at a government meeting, Putin said future talks should be based on discussions held in Istanbul in 2022 and agreements reached during his meeting with US President Donald Trump in Anchorage in 2025. Putin also called for stronger measures to deal with Ukrainian attacks on civilian infrastructure, accusing Kyiv of targeting energy facilities and tourism as Russian forces continue to advance.
We know and see that the Kyiv regime, with its positions on the front line deteriorating rapidly as it is losing one territory after another and our soldiers are capturing one settlement after another, has adopted the tactics of hitting our civilian facilities and infrastructure. They're trying to create problems with energy supplies and affect the tourist season.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky responded by praising Ukraine's military units involved in recent operations against Russian targets. He said continued pressure on Moscow is showing results and pushing more Russians to question the war.
The majority in Russia is already complaining to Putin that his war has no end in sight. All the current difficulties for the Russians should bring them closer to the idea that this is their war, and it is not just a stone from the sky, and that their war must end.
Meanwhile, Ukraine says its forces carried out new drone strikes overnight, targeting a major power facility in Russian-held Crimea. Kyiv said drones hit the main substation at the Sevastopol power plant and that the operation targeted military-related sites in Russia and occupied Ukrainian territories. Russian officials also reported a Ukrainian drone attack in the Nizhny Novgorod region that killed 2 people. The latest developments come as fighting continues and hopes for a peace agreement remain uncertain.
A News' Dasha Chernyshova has the latest from Moscow. Let's take a look at her report.
Russian President Vladimir Putin says he remains ready for peace talks with Ukraine despite escalating attacks on Russia's oil infrastructure that have contributed to fuel disruptions in several regions of the country. The latest comments come as senior Russian officials insist that Moscow remains open for talks, but only under what they describe as serious conditions. Speaking at a forum on international relations, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov dismissed what he called European demands surrounding the settlement. Lavrov said Russia is prepared for talks at any moment if meaningful proposals are presented, but stressed that Moscow will not accept a ceasefire as a precondition for negotiations. He added that a diplomatic solution to the conflict is still possible, though Russia would reject what he described as temporary fixes or ultimatums. According to Lavrov, the ball is not on Russia's side of the field. Meanwhile, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said that the situation on the battlefield is deteriorating for Kyiv and warned of what he called irreversible consequences for Ukraine. He said Russian forces are advancing across the front line while accusing Kyiv of targeting civilian infrastructure inside Russia. He also said that there is no currently agreement on a venue for future peace talks and suggested that any dialogue between Russia and Europe would depend on whether European governments are willing to engage. Dasha Chernyshova for A News in Moscow.
Well, to discuss this further, I am now joined by Inês Burrell, a geopolitical analyst currently in Caldas de Reina in Portugal. Inês, welcome. Great to have you on the program. Now, Ukraine says it's striking Russian military infrastructure and supply routes. How significant are these strikes from the battlefield perspective, and how much of these strikes is actually shaping the political narrative?
Well, these are very serious and very real changes that are happening on the battlefield. Sorry, I can hear double sound.
We will just take a quick look at that gallery. Do you hear me clearly now?
I can hear you, and I can hear myself.
Well, as we are trying to resolve this issue, how about now? Can you please say a few words before we get back to the interview?
I've frozen there. There's nothing on the screen.
I can hear you quite well. Can you hear me? Well, as we are waiting, we have... All right, let's just go for a quick break before we get back with plenty more news, analysis, and coverage. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. We had some issues connecting to our first guest on our top story, the latest developments in the Russia-Ukraine war. But we are now joined by our second guest, that is Brian Pickens, founder of Valorix Group, former U.S. Army Special Forces operator and security consultant. Brian, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on the program. When we take a look at the battlefield right now, how would you describe the military balance? Is either side gaining momentum at this point?
You know, I think what's really interesting to be understood is Ukraine hit a point where they had to, revolutionize their technological advances, and now that they've gained technological advancement over Russia, they're slowly starting to turn the tide of momentum moving the other direction. So it's kind of not an overnight kind of thing, but I would argue with you that Ukraine is turning the tide. They're hitting deep into Russia. They're causing massive problems for the logistics of Russia being able to fuel the front line. And as you might see, some of the Russian war machine continuing to move slightly, that momentum is slowing and on the front. And you'll see very soon, very shortly, I believe it'll pause, and then Ukraine is going to start again taking back land that Russia has stolen.
And on those deep strikes, Ukraine says it's targeting Russia's military-linked infrastructure and supply routes. From a military perspective, how much can such strikes actually change the tempo of the war?
They can completely change it. I mean, the front lines are only fueled by the logistics that make it to the front line, whether that be fuel, whether that be electricity. And we have to understand that this war is very technological. These drones and all of the equipment that we're seeing used on the front takes electric power, takes either generators and or electricity in order to fuel it. Generators need fuel in order to run the generators, whether that be diesel or normal petrol. Every time that Ukraine has an effect on the infrastructure of Russia, it's completely changing the ability for the Russian war machine to move that line or continue to fuel the fight on the front.
And with Ukraine trying to head deep behind Russian lines, Russia says it's advancing across parts of the front line. Which is more important right now, do you think? Is it territory gained or the ability to disrupt the enemy's capacity to fight?
It's the difference between playing chess and playing checkers. Right now, just because let's say Russia has had some tactical wins on the ground. None of those tactical wins are of any massive magnitude. Ukraine is a huge country. If they move the line slightly forward on the Russian side, Russian side moves forward 1 kilometer in some spaces. You're talking about over 1,000 kilometers of front line that are, the size of Ukraine is massive. So small gains on the Russian side doesn't change the magnitude of the war, really change much. What does change the war is gaining logistic superiority, cutting off logistic lines so that the Russian war machine can't move, and then starting to scale the technology that you have, the drone tech, and the just really innovation that Ukraine has, even in doctrinal space, to be able to maneuver and combined arms drone warfare in lack of having Western support with a lot of exquisite munitions. Ukraine is changing the war front and moving the other direction, regardless of what Russia wants to put out as a propagandized statement that they're maintaining any momentum.
We'll get to that Western support in just a minute, but as both sides are still clearly escalating things militarily, Russia's Putin says Moscow remains ready for peace talks. In your experience, does battlefield pressure usually create space for diplomacy, or does it maybe make compromise harder?
I think, if we're going to come to a peace talk, we have to understand who is in strength of argument at that table. Ukraine now gaining momentum and changing the line and starting to push back Russia again puts them in a powerful position to sit at a peace talk, if you will. The problem with that, though, is Russia now knowing that Ukraine is sitting at a position where they can bring strength politically to the conversation, saying that Russia is losing currently. Russia doesn't want to go into a peace talk currently right now. They want to regain momentum, show political and military power, pushing Ukraine before they try to come to that peace talk. So I think the only way that we really come to a peace talk that is in the support of Ukraine, that is to push Russia out of the country and in any way, supportive of what Ukraine's goal is, right, is to have a sovereign Ukraine. We're going to have to show undeniably that Ukraine has moved that line, moved, say, 100 kilometers of that trench line the other direction towards Russia, and that they are undeniably winning. I think that's where we come to a peace talk where the society in Russia, the culture in Russia, not only are they suffering due to this and suffering economically, for them to see also that they're losing this conflict undeniably, I think is the only time that we're really going to see a peace talk come to fruition. While it's kind of sitting in this, not stalemate, but trending momentum, moving in another direction, I don't think we're moving towards a peace talk. I think this is all just trying to appease political parties that maybe are on the West asking for a peace agreement.
And Brian, on that support, we've heard from Western partners pledging new air defenses, most recently after the G7 summit. But from a military planning standpoint, how hard is it to fight a war when weapon deliveries, funding, and political backing are never fully guaranteed?
I mean, it's almost, I would say impossible, from a Western construct of understanding warfare. I was a Green Beret for a long period of time. I retired out of the United States military after 20 years. And then after doing so, I fought in Ukraine for a year. And, it's a very different war when you're fighting a war that is relying upon the good graces and charity of other countries to come to the aid and supply what you need for the war front. Even when we would gain momentum in the battle space, we didn't have enough logistic power to maintain that momentum moving forward, to either hold that line or continue to move the line, towards Russia. So I would say it's extremely difficult, and if we're talking about us showing the proper way to plan warfare, to work with our partners. We need to collectively come together and combine arms logistics, if you will, and combine our efforts into Ukraine. And I'm speaking the West needs to do so in order to, maintain enough logistic power to maintain momentum on the battle space once they gain momentum. Just gaining momentum in general is, you have to be able to throw enough firepower at your enemy to suppress the enemy, maneuver on the enemy, find, fix, finish, and then start to move that line the other direction. Then to maintain that momentum it takes a similar amount of logistic power. And I think we've, as the West and as Western nations that have come in and tried to support it, we're short-sighted in the idea that this is a long game. And some of that is that they thought Russia was going to win in Ukraine in one day. Obviously, that hasn't happened. Ukrainians will not live as Russians. They will fight to the last tooth and nail, and there will be a free Ukraine. It's how many losses are we going to allow them to take before we really back it appropriately.
Brian, thank you so much for coming on Primetime and sharing your insight and analysis.
Thank you.
All right, after a short break, we'll take a look at the top business stories of the day with Katie Wilson. Don't go away. Welcome back. It is now time for the top business stories of the day. And for those, we turn to Katie Wilson. Katie, thank you for joining me here in the studio. And what have you got in store for us tonight?
So Alibaba's hit back to its inclusion on a US government list of companies that are allegedly linked to the Chinese military. We'll also have more from SK Hynix and the EU's probe into Meta. So first this evening, Alibaba is taking the US government to court. The Chinese technology and e-commerce giant has sued Washington over its inclusion on a Pentagon list of companies allegedly linked to China's military, calling the designation baseless and damaging to its business.
Alibaba is suing the US over Washington's allegation it is linked to the Chinese military. The e-commerce and technology giant filed the suit in a California court on Tuesday. That's after the Pentagon moved earlier this month to expand its list of alleged Chinese military companies. It says Alibaba is a contributor to the Chinese defense industrial base through its affiliation with Beijing's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology. The company says that allegation has no basis in fact or law. Alibaba says it is governed by independent board members, none of whom have any military affiliation. Its lawsuit seeks removal from the list. A Pentagon spokesperson declined to comment, saying the agency does not discuss pending litigation. Under recent US law, the Defense Department cannot contract with companies on the blacklist. Other firms on the list include search engine giant Baidu and automaker BYD.
Wall Street's AI-fueled rally hit a speed bump yesterday. US stocks fell sharply as investors questioned the pace of spending on artificial intelligence, sending chip makers and big tech shares lower.
A down day on Wall Street Tuesday saw the Dow edge lower, while the S&P 500 tumbled nearly 1.5%, and the tech-heavy Nasdaq plummeted about 2.2%. Jitters over debt-funded AI spending led to sharp losses in semiconductor and other big tech stocks. Shares of Nvidia dropped more than 4%, Intel shed over 6%, and shares of Marvell Technology tumbled more than 9%. Memory chip makers Micron Technology and SanDisk, among the best performers on the S&P 500 this year, both fell around 13%. Micron's earnings report on Wednesday will draw intense scrutiny, says Nancy Tengler, CEO and Chief Investment Officer at Laffer Tengler Investments.
So I think this is a hugely important report, much like NVIDIA has been in other periods. We're going to be watching their guidance on HBM4, which is the Vera Rubin platform NVIDIA relationship that they have. Is that continuing to grow quickly? And then margins. The company pulled reported 81% margins. I mean, imagine that, 81%, and the market is determined that they stay above 80. So those are the two things we'll be paying attention to.
Among other movers, Elon Musk's SpaceX, which debuted this month, continued its bumpy ride, briefly dipping below its opening price of $150 before paring losses to close about 1% higher. Investors on Tuesday were also watching developments in the Middle East. The Senate backed legislation to halt U.S. military action against Iran, but it was unclear how this would affect the war as Washington continues to negotiate a peace agreement with Tehran.
South Korea's AI chip champion is aiming for a record-breaking fundraising haul. SK Hynix says it plans to raise nearly $30 billion through a Nasdaq listing as booming demand for AI chips fuels an ambitious expansion drive.
SK Hynix plans to raise up to $29.43 billion via the listing of American depository receipts, the South Korean chipmaker said on Wednesday. The move comes as the company seeks to expand its investor base and production capacity for chips used in artificial intelligence. The world's second largest memory chip maker plans to issue 17.79 million new shares to back a listing of ADRs on the Nasdaq market on July 10, it said. Proceeds will be used to build a chip factory, an advanced packaging fab, and purchase equipment. The company said 10 ADRs will be equivalent to one common share. If completed at the top end of the indicated price range, the deal would become the largest ever ADR offering. It would surpass the $21.8 billion raised by Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba in 2014. SK Hynix is a dominant supplier of high-bandwidth memory chips used in AI systems for customers such as Nvidia and Alphabet's Google. It's one of the biggest beneficiaries of the global AI boom, becoming South Korea's most valuable company on Monday, overtaking Samsung Electronics.
Artificial intelligence is increasingly reshaping the banking industry, and jobs could be part of the equation. Spain's Santander has begun talks with unions over a potential early retirement program, which could affect thousands of employees as leaders look to AI to streamline operations and cut costs.
Up to 3,000 Santander employees in Spain could be offered early retirement. That's as the bank braces for impacts brought on by AI, Spanish newspaper Expansion reported on Wednesday. Lenders across Europe expect the technology to streamline operations, but also reduce staffing needs, particularly in administrative roles. The Spanish bank said it had started conversations with unions over the plan. However, it didn't provide specific figures. Citing sources familiar with negotiations, Expansion said the reduction in Santander's home country could affect 10 to 15% of about 20,000 employees. Santander said in February that by 2028, more than $1.14 billion in cost savings and revenue would come from AI initiatives. Like other European banks, Santander has already cut its workforce to reduce costs. It's reduced its headcount by about 14,000 employees in the last 2 years to below 200,000.
Meta is facing renewed regulatory pressure in Europe over the safety of young users. According to a report by Bloomberg, the European Commission is preparing to escalate its investigation into whether the company's social media platforms are designed in ways that could be addictive to children.
The European Commission plans to ramp up its probe into Meta, a Bloomberg report said. The EU alleges the social media giant designs its platforms to be addictive to children. The report said the bloc is preparing preliminary findings but has not set a date for the announcement. It's not the first time Meta has faced scrutiny from the Commission. It first opened a probe into the company under the Digital Services Act in May 2024, due to concerns it had not adequately addressed risks to children. In April, it charged Meta with breaching its tech rules and said the Instagram owner must do more to block children under 13 from accessing social networks. The report said the EU is considering curbs similar to those announced by the UK and other countries after an expert panel delivers recommendations next month. Meta and the European Commission did not immediately respond to Reuters' requests for comment. Reuters could not independently verify the report. Meanwhile, a source told Reuters the social media giant is pushing for legal protection in Washington. The source said Meta is lobbying US lawmakers for language that would shield social media firms from certain claims tied to minors' safety and privacy.
And finally, from robots and AI-powered gadgets to next-generation batteries, the future was on display in Beijing this week. China's biggest supply chain expo has unveiled its first ever artificial intelligence zone, drawing global tech names and giving visitors a glimpse of how rapidly new technologies are becoming part of everyday life.
Tech giants at the China International Supply Chain Expo showcased their latest gadgets at the event's first ever artificial intelligence zone. Attendees say the new feature demonstrates the country's eagerness to compete in the booming AI industry.
I think AI is developing incredibly fast right now. Many people may not have really noticed it. I'm from Fujian, and the city where I used to live is relatively small. Today, after coming to Beijing for this exhibition, I've realized that AI has already permeated almost every aspect of people's lives. In fact, many people haven't even become aware of it yet, but however you look at it, it has greatly improved the convenience of our daily lives.
NVIDIA, Intel, and Alibaba were among the big names featured at the AI Zone, which included displays of robots, processors, and AI-powered consumer products. Beyond AI, batteries and energy storage were also a major focus. Chinese battery manufacturer Goshen High-Tech used the event to show off its latest products, as demand for electrification and renewable energy storage continues to grow. Chinese Vice Premier Ding Shui-Shuang spoke at the expo, saying China advocates for green industrial transformation. He also discussed Beijing's opposition to protectionism, unilateral sanctions, and export controls, and called for greater international cooperation in global supply chains.
That's your business news for this evening. Back to you, Andy.
Interesting stuff as always, Katie. Thank you so much. All right, after the break, we'll take a closer look at the EU's new connectivity push through the South Caucasus and why Azerbaijan's role is central. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. A new EU plan is putting Central Asia connectivity back in focus. But the route it hopes to strengthen comes with one major question. Where does Azerbaijan fit in?
The European Commission has launched a new connectivity agenda platform to strengthen transport, energy, digital and trade links between Europe and Central Asia through the Black Sea region and the South Caucasus. The EU says the platform will coordinate investment and policy across those sectors, with strengthening the Trans-Caspian Transport Corridor, also known as the Middle Corridor, named as one of its key priorities. The initiative is tied to agreements with international financial institutions and is expected to help mobilize up to €2 billion in strategic investment. Participants included the EU, Armenia, several Central Asian states, Turkey, Ukraine, G7 members, and international financial institutions. But one absence stands out. Azerbaijan was not listed among them. That raises a fundamental question. How can a platform focused on South Caucasus connectivity move forward without one of the region's most important transit countries? The Middle Corridor links Central Asia to Europe through the Caspian Sea, the South Caucasus, and Turkey. In practical terms, its current regional backbone runs through Azerbaijan and Georgia. European Commissioner Marta Koss said trade along the route could increase fivefold over the next 15 years if infrastructure gaps are closed and projects are better coordinated. Armenia has increasingly been discussed in European connectivity planning as a potential link in future regional transport networks. Yet its practical role remains tied to progress in the Azerbaijan-Armenia peace process and possible Turkish-Armenian normalization. That makes the EU's approach both politically and strategically significant. Can Armenia realistically function as a standalone bridge between Central Asia and Europe without Azerbaijan. Geography, infrastructure, and existing transport realities make that question unavoidable. For now, Azerbaijan's absence remains the key question in a platform whose practical success is closely tied to the Middle Corridor.
Well, joining me now to discuss this further is A News's Deputy Editor-in-Chief, Orhan Amashov. Orhan, welcome. Always a pleasure to share
Great to be here, Andy.
With you. Let's start with the thing that caught everyone's attention. Now, last year, when this connectivity agenda was first presented, Azerbaijan was listed there. However, at this week's launch, Azerbaijan is absent. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Global Gateway initiative was proposed back in 2021, and the original idea was to make sure European Union is not reliant on Russia, basically, and European Union has a number of alternatives to be able to reach Chinese markets, where Central Asia, and naturally Azerbaijan has always been widely regarded and is regarded as an indispensable element of the European Global Gateway initiative and the project as its concomitant. But what happened yesterday was very interesting. Their own explanation, the European explanation, is that they got a parallel track with Azerbaijan. That's the reason Azerbaijan was not invited. What was very fascinating, my colleagues who spoke to me this morning did show the displays there. Azerbaijani flag was present, and Azerbaijan's presence as part of the initiative is duly acknowledged, but there was no Azerbaijani representative there. Their own explanation is hinging upon the fact that, on the explanation, on the assumption that there's a parallel track with Azerbaijan, and plus, this is the most important explanation of theirs, that they've been focusing on the bottlenecks, on the incomplete links, and Azerbaijan does not constitute a bottleneck in the sense that Azerbaijan is a complete link there, and their focus was on the eastern part of the connectivity agenda, Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, ports on the eastern shore of the Caspian, and Armenia and Turkish Armenian normalization. Therefore, Azerbaijan is a separate matter. Azerbaijan is not a problematic missing link. That's the reason Azerbaijan wasn't there. But I would say there are at least two arguments against this particular proposition. One argument is that you're talking about Azerbaijan, a country without which, as we see here, there's no middle corridor. Even if you have Georgia and Armenia together, but you don't have Azerbaijan, you wouldn't be able to reach Caspian Sea. I mean, naturally, you could reach the other side of the Caspian Sea via Iran, but Iran is not part of the middle corridor in a classical sense of it. If there's going to be a regime change there and Iran becomes a Western-friendly country, of course, naturally, things may change, but that does not seem to be very likely possibility at this very juncture. Therefore, even if you have Georgia and Armenia together, without Azerbaijan, you don't have middle corridor in the South Caucasus. Azerbaijan should be part of the debate. This is one thing. And number two, although you're discussing those bottlenecks or incomplete or rather missing links, and all of the things are connected with Azerbaijan. If you're talking about Armenian connectivity infrastructure when it comes to border crossings, when some of the border crossings are between Azerbaijan and Armenia. So Azerbaijan is naturally part of the debate, must be part of the debate. You talk about Turkish-Armenian normalization, those two crossing points connecting Turkey with Armenia, then of course naturally that will happen once Azerbaijan-Armenian peace process does reach its logical conclusion. So therefore, not having Azerbaijan there was not very productive. And my understanding on the basis of what I've heard, I don't think that this is a case of EU inviting Azerbaijan not attending the event. I think Azerbaijan was not invited, and that seems to be something very interesting. But of course, it does not change the absolute vital centrality of Azerbaijan, and we must be absolutely clear on that.
And now you basically showed us the middle corridor, how it works. How can you get from Europe to Central Asia through South Caucasus? EU wants to strengthen its connection to Central Asia and South Caucasus. How do they think that might work if Azerbaijan is not part of the conversation?
Well, they say Azerbaijan is part of the conversation, but it's part of the separate track. But of course, naturally, we've explained the counter-arguments to that. Azerbaijan should be part of the debate. And plus, I think Azerbaijan is important on its own, of course, because Azerbaijan is a key energy provider. Azerbaijan has got strategic deals and relationships with a number of EU countries. I think around 9 EU countries have developed strategic partnerships with Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is a nation which is important in terms of connectivity and energy-related matters. So without Armenia, Azerbaijan is important on its own. Azerbaijan and Georgia together built Middle Corridor. So middle corridor in this region, in the South Caucasus, is there. It's not an abstract notion. It is there, and Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railway is part of the Middle Corridor. Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan is part of the Middle Corridor. Effectively, these connectivity elements form the Middle Corridor. Armenia is important as a second link. Without Armenia, Middle Corridor will exist, but with Armenia it will be more comprehensive. What happened, I think, last year when, after the summit, in first of its kind summit in Samarkand, Uzbekistan, EU Central Asia Summit, when the statement was issued and then commentaries being made, it was very clear that European Union wants to somewhat exclude Georgia from the Middle Corridor debate in the South Caucasus and build its argument on the basis of Azerbaijani, Armenian peace process and Turkish-Armenian normalization by excluding Georgia, and that's going to be quite counterproductive. And also, although Azerbaijan important on its own, I think the real importance of Middle Corridor in the South Caucasus for EU is not about individual countries like Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia. It's about actually this region providing access to Central Asia, because Central Asia and resource of Central Asia, control, battle for them will define the next few decades. For that reason, I think that Azerbaijan and Armenia should be viewed together. And in fact, I would say all the constituent members of the region must be viewed as one whole. Otherwise, EU will miss on a number of important strategic points.
Well, with that in mind, Orhan, would you say that EU is trying to pursue a different model to begin and to build on rather than to strengthen these existing ones?
Well, in this particular case, I suppose, as long as the last 23rd of June meeting is concerned, their focus was on the missing links. So that was their argument why Azerbaijan was not invited. But EU is lagging behind in many ways in this geography. Trump route for international peace and prosperity is absolute indispensable vital element. Everything else happening now is connected with Trump route for international peace and prosperity. EU has done very little in this region in terms of entrenching its footprint. Now EU is investing slowly. It's got strategic dialogue with European Union, with Armenia, but everything is built upon Trump route for international peace and prosperity. And what is Trump route for peace and prosperity? It is basically Zangezur corridor. It's effectively the link connecting two separate parts of Azerbaijan via Armenia. Upon that particular link, everything is built. And EU is not particularly happy with US presence. We understand that. Some EU officials, during their conversations, they make it very clear that, well, Trump is a very chameleonic figure. What will happen in 2028 if he's no longer president? So EU does perceive itself as more of institutional sort of entity as opposed to the United States. And therefore, we all understand that something must happen physically on the ground before 2028, and we imagine it will naturally happen. So EU is lagging behind. But second aspect to EU's presence in this region is that it is hell-bent on Turkish-Armenian normalization, and it's absolutely vital, because if you're talking about Armenia being extricated from the Russia-dominated structures, you cannot extricate it just by means of having strategic dialogue with Armenia. You need to make sure Armenia does no longer need to be part of the Eurasian Economic Union, which Armenia is now, and it's immensely beneficial to Armenia. And Armenia does not want to leave that particular entity for very rational and sound reasons. But if you want really extract Armenia, extricate it from the Russia-dominated structures, you need to make sure Turkish-Armenian normalization happens. That could happen if Azerbaijani-Armenia peace deal is signed. And that will not happen before Armenia removes that constitutional obstacle. So all of these things are connected. And what is very fascinating, without taking into account Azerbaijan's central role, EU will not be able to attain its objectives in the region. Azerbaijan is necessary to make sure Armenia is valuable, because Armenia, on its own, look there, it's surrounded by Turkey and Azerbaijan and Iran and Georgia. On its own, it's not a valuable connectivity element there. I mean, what's the point of having Armenia as a connectivity hub if you don't have proper Armenian-Azerbaijani normalization? Can Armenia provide, as a standalone element, access to Central Asia? Of course. It's not a rocket science, it's geography. And it so happens that if you want to gain access to Caspian, Georgia and Armenia together wouldn't make much sense. They are necessary as an element to get there, but you need to have Azerbaijan. So I think, by and large, Azerbaijani national interests, they are in line with Armenian national interests in many ways. And cumulatively, those national interests of those two countries are in line with EU interests. So therefore, what happened on the 27th of June was beyond the preponderant element that is defining the current conjecture between Baku and Brussels.
And when you look at the latest signals from Brussels, would you say that EU is trying to seize the opportunity going by all these signals that we are seeing relating to the peace process? Do you think that EU is preparing itself already to deal with a region that it thinks it will be in a few years' time?
Absolutely. EU is taking necessary measures to lay the foundation for the next stage of its involvement. But those steps must be properly synchronized. Ursula von der Leyen, EU Commission President, will be in Yerevan early July, and just we were informed today that she will also be in Baku. We know that EU Special Representative to the South Caucasus and Special Representative dealing with Georgian crisis, Lady Magdalena Gorna, will be in Azerbaijan. Probably she's already had, I don't know. But yesterday we received reports that she's on the way. So basically, I suppose either today or tomorrow she will be in here. Although Ursula von der Leyen's trip to Baku and Yerevan must have been planned properly in advance, because Ursula von der Leyen gave signals related to her prospective visit to Armenia when she was in Armenia early in May, and when she congratulated Prime Minister. But I think the special representative trip must have been, probably was. I only speculate and speculate responsibly, and I'm fully conscious of the caveats that are limiting this speculation. I think that special representative trip to Baku could have been generated by the need to fix this misunderstanding regarding 23rd of June absence of Azerbaijan.
And when we just take a look at this document, this connectivity strategy, when you look at the numbers there, 2 billion euros of investments, would you say that's a significant sum, and how much can it impact the regional infrastructure?
2 billion euros or US dollars, in this particular case, we talk about euros, of course, is not big enough money, big enough sum to sort out all the bottlenecks here, to deal with all the missing links. But it is a very focused project dealing with particular elements. It is not a mega project style money, and the EU is very careful in terms of allocating sums for this sort of purpose. Their purpose is to lay the foundation. They're very much focused on their custom-related elements, digitalization, preparing people to deal with the seamless connectivity matters. The money is significant, it's very important. But it is largely allocated for the missing links. And as long as this particular region is concerned, I don't think that any proportion of that money relates to whatever may happen between Georgia and Azerbaijan, although there's one particular aspect where EU will be interested, because currently we don't have direct trade. I mean, direct land border is not open between Turkey and Armenia, therefore there's no direct trade in a classical physical sense of the word between Armenia and Turkey. But there's a direct trade of sorts via Georgia, and that happens via Ahal-Kalaki. So certain portions of money could go there. And of course, Turkish-Armenian border, the two crossing points there, also part of the equation there. And also this money should be viewed in progress. Of course, naturally will increase, and we shouldn't forget that US also is massively invested in this process, and Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity, with a massive infrastructure evolving, which should ideally, and I'm sure will eventually, entail highway, motorway, the railway, fiber optic cables, and so forth. So the basically essence of connectivity epicenter there is not the entire Armenia, but it's that southern part of Armenia, which is commensurate with Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity. So there will be competing interests. I mean, one more point about this. The challenge for EU is not so much about connectivity per se, it's about removing Russia from the landscape, because we have to remember, and it's an absolutely indispensable part of the debate, Armenia's railway system is owned by Russia, and Russia does not want to give away those assets. And I think that asset, that Southern Caucasus sort of railway system, is far more important than Russian military base there in terms of its value. And the battle for Armenia's railway system is about to begin. It has already started.
Just the other day, Orhan, we've heard news of an agreement signed between the telecoms in Azerbaijan and Armenia, and we've heard some say that this agreement follows the logic of the TRIP project. Now, with that in mind, with such US influence in the region, would you say that EU is perhaps a bit concerned of maybe too much American influence, and is Brussels now trying to, in a way, appease regional countries and gain some sort of a foothold both in South Caucasus and in Central Asia?
But definitely, EU wants to get its own share in this massive cake of connectivity. And regarding the Zangezur corridor, Trump route for international peace and prosperity, the EU was also involved in those negotiations between Azerbaijan and Armenia at the time. They were offering their services, and they failed there. And when I interviewed Charles Michel, former EU Council President, I noticed that element of, not, I wouldn't say delusion or a lack of happiness, but the fact that they could have achieved what the United States have achieved. I think that was very clear, of course. Yes, there is a competition between EU and US. They may be slightly unhappy about Trump route for international peace and prosperity. Therefore, they need to get their own connectivity pieces inside Armenia, in the context of Turkish-Armenian border, in the context of Turkish Armenian-Azerbaijani border as well. But one more point, let me add it. You mentioned about this fiber optic cable agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Basically, it's not an interstate arrangement. It's a commercial arrangement between two entities, Azetelecom and its Armenian counterpart, namely Armenia Telecom. Armenians are saying, their media, the outlets are saying that there will be two crossings there. One is at Kornizo, and one up there in Gazakh Ijavan, which will provide physicality, a physical part of the connectivity. But my feeling is, on the basis of what Azerbaijan has been arguing all along the way, that physicality, physical infrastructure, will also preponderantly be in that southern Armenian territory, which is commensurate with TRIP.
Orhan, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Brilliant insight, as always.
Thank you.
All right, after a short break, we will take a look at Ursula von der Leyen's upcoming trip to Baku and Yerevan and what it could signal for the South Caucasus. We'll be right back. Welcome back, you're watching Primetime. European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen is expected in Azerbaijan on July 1st. Before heading to Armenia for talks with Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan. The visit to Yerevan comes at a significant moment. The European Union is stepping up political and financial support for Armenia as relations between Moscow and Yerevan continue to deteriorate. EU officials say the trip is intended to signal support for Armenia as it faces growing pressure over its future direction. At the same time, Armenia is trying to balance closer ties with Brussels while still remaining part of the Russia-led Eurasian Economic Union. Well, joining me now to discuss this is Hussein Sultanli, advisor at the Air Center, joining us from Baku. Hussein, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on Primetime. Now, Ursula von der Leyen is expected in Azerbaijan first, and then in Armenia. How should we read that sequence of planned events?
I think the trip is, of course, an important step by the European Union. Like any visit by a high-level official, we should expect, we should view it, in a positive frame. It is, however, I think important to differentiate, between the Azerbaijan sort of portfolio and the Armenia portfolio. And, the conversation that we have been having over the past 24 hours, I think, is another demonstration that, in its engagement with Azerbaijan, the EU isn't necessarily, portraying itself as, a consistent actor which has a very clear plan. That is not the case with Armenia. I think, it's very clear in its relationship with Yerevan what the European Union, seeks and is looking for. So I think, currently we are, with Azerbaijan, we are experiencing kind of, one step forward, two steps back dynamic. On the one hand, there is positive cooperation, and I think in particular, ever since Kaja Kallas, for example, took the position of High Representative for Foreign Affairs, there has been more positive momentum. However, we also do see contradictory statements, contradictory steps. And if the EU really wants to, establish itself as a, influential regional power, a regional actor, it really has to, figure out these inconsistencies and find a better balance, between its Azerbaijan and Armenia portfolios.
And when it comes to Armenia, the EU is increasing its both political and financial support for Yerevan at a time when Armenia's relations with Russia are deteriorating. What would you say that shift means for the wider South Caucasus?
Well, as I mentioned, I think it demonstrates that that Armenia, has a particular position or particular place in the European Union, in the European Union's, vision and South Caucasus strategy. Undoubtedly, I think, and I think this is expressed publicly, a major, factor behind the Armenia approach from Brussels is Russia, of course. However, for the wider South Caucasus, it is important not to lose, sight of the broader regional process that is ongoing here. And we're seeing, very frequently, almost on a daily basis, new steps taken by Azerbaijan and by Armenia in their normalization track. And given how influential the European Union is, because at the end of the day, even if we have discussions about whether it's a strategic actor or not, it is a significant financial power with major resources which it can implement. I think it is important for the EU to operate without losing sight of this normalization track. And I think sometimes some of the steps that we're seeing, for example, yesterday it was announced that the EU will be supporting the development of infrastructure from the Armenian border to Turkish border points. Although, of course, such infrastructure development is always welcome, it's important for it for the actions not to be detached from the Azerbaijan-Armenia process, because at the end of the day, it is the relationship between Azerbaijan and Armenia that is the most essential factor if we want to achieve a stable South Caucasus. And I think external actors must ensure that whenever they engage with either one or the other, they don't lose sight of the bilateral track that is ongoing between the two countries.
Well, Armenia is seeking closer ties with the European Union while still remaining part of the Russia-led Eurasian Economic Union. How sustainable is that balancing act, do you think?
Well, whether it's sustainable or not, it's something that remains to be seen. It will have to be observed in practice, because on the one hand, we are seeing occasional statements which suggest that the Armenian government it sees itself with a European future. But on the other hand, we are also seeing statements which are clearly designed to not exacerbate the relationship with Russia. So I think it will have to be, it's something that remains to be seen. However, what is clear is that Armenia is decisive in that it wants to get closer to Brussels. And whenever this is, whenever this is reciprocal, as we're seeing, because, for example, the list of measures or the list of new agreements that were announced after the first EU-Armenia summit, it demonstrates that this is a very reciprocal sort of a reciprocal path which is supported by both Armenia and the European Union. So we can't say decisively. However, it is clear that something has changed fundamentally in Armenia's foreign policy outlook, and what that eventually looks like, only time will tell.
And Hussein, you've touched upon the importance of bilateral questions being resolved before any external cooperation from the European Union, for example, from Azerbaijan's perspective. How important is it that European engagement with Armenia is linked to the practical progress on peace, borders, and regional transport routes?
I think it's essential, because Azerbaijan has consistently made its position clear that for it, the for the country, its national interests and its sovereignty and its territorial integrity are undeniable, and that is the basis of um, whatever framework the South Caucasus will end up operating in the future. And whenever you see actors, especially influential actors, which don't always adhere to that logic in their actions, I think Azerbaijan has every right to be concerned. In the last 6 months, we've seen several instances of on the one hand, European politicians uh, emphasizing the importance of normalization, emphasizing their support for the process. However, on the other hand, we see steps like what was seen yesterday when Azerbaijan, is kind of um, avoided, let's say. I also recall relatively recently in a statement by the European Commission, there was a very clear absence of the mention of Azerbaijan, which is very difficult to understand. Why? Because the South Caucasus, at the end of the day, only consists of three countries, and not mentioning Azerbaijan, in a public statement referring to the South Caucasus can be quite difficult to understand, really. So I think Azerbaijan is very clear, and in recent months, whenever such instances have occurred, the country has been, very fast and very proactive in publicly demonstrating, that it will not tolerate any violation of its red lines, let's say, and those red lines, the ones that I mentioned, they must serve as the basis of whatever regional framework the South Caucasus evolves into. And of course, external actors like the EU will have a role to play in this, but they need to make sure that their role considers not just one country or perhaps the country that they're closest to, but it considers all the countries in the process.
And having that in mind, Hussein, do you believe that for the European Union to have a stronger presence in the South Caucasus, that it perhaps needs to deal with the region as it actually functions, having in mind Azerbaijan's role in energy, connectivity, and transport links?
Definitely, I think the Azerbaijan EU agenda, the bilateral agenda between the sides, has places where it can go. There's a lot of work that can still be done. For example, the partnership and cooperation agreement, which was signed between the sides, it was actually signed in 1999. So there has been, so many years when, the institutional framework, let's say, of the relationship hasn't really been updated, upgraded. Of course, the countries signed a very important, memorandum of understanding on a strategic partnership in the field of energy in 2022, and that has definitely, generated tangible results. I'm not saying that, the EU and Azerbaijan haven't achieved anything. My point instead is that there isn't really, a balance between how the EU approaches Armenia and how it approaches Azerbaijan. That doesn't mean that the relationships have to be the same or working in the exact same directions or so on. It just means that Azerbaijan has to feel valued, and especially because the country is increasingly recognized globally as a regional leader. And when you have an influential actor that recognizes this, but not always, that's difficult to accept, especially because the peace process is still ongoing. It's still not a complete process. The peace deal itself, hasn't yet officially been signed. There are still things that have to be done for it to be signed. So it is a fragile and sensitive thing. So whenever external actors, interfere not in the desired way, that can definitely have detrimental effects. And I think Azerbaijan is determined to ensure that this doesn't happen again in the future.
Well, Hussein, thank you kindly for coming on Primetime and offering your analysis.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a closer look at the diplomatic fallout from Washington as Italy's Giorgia Meloni tries to calm tensions after a row with Donald Trump over a G7 photo op. Don't go away. Welcome back, you're watching Primetime. The diplomatic fallout from Washington is now being felt in Europe after a personal row with US President Donald Trump over a G7 photograph. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni is trying to cool tensions, calling for relations with Washington to be put back on a normal footing.
I do not intend to keep fueling this dispute. I believe that our bilateral work with the United States must return to normal. Clearly, I believe that Minister Tajani was right, in the immediate term, to cancel his visit to Washington to send a signal. But once the message has got through, there is no need to take it any further. I'm reading a lot of speculation about what Italian foreign policy will be now. It will be the same as it has been for the last 80 years. I mean, I'm not changing my mind about how important it is to maintain a strong relationship between the United States and Europe. Frankly, I don't see any commercial repercussions.
Well, joining us now to discuss this is Valeria Gianotta, an academic at the Center for International Policy Studies, coming to us from Rome. Valeria, welcome. Great to have you on Primetime. Now, Giorgia Meloni has spent a lot of her political capital presenting herself as someone who has kind of a direct line to Donald Trump. Has this row exposed the limits of that relationship?
Well, we are kind of all astonished on the shift that we are witnessing between being the great leader, referring to Giorgia Meloni as quoted by President Donald Trump, to become no longer a good friend. Definitely what is nowadays in front of our eyes, it's a matter of leader-to-leader diplomacy, as much as to do with the personality of President Donald Trump. On the other side, the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has invested a lot. First of all, in strengthening further the already excellent relations of Italy with the United States. On the other side, to create a sort of framework for the Italian national sovereignty, so-called Italian national sovereignty, and then acting as a bridge towards the European Union. This action actually has been successful for the very beginning, but along with the American war on Iran, all the knots came to the surface. So basically, the main topic and the main matter of frictions between Italy's Giorgia Meloni and Donald Trump was the fact that back to February, Italy denied any kind of support to America along with its intervention to Iran. And that was the turning point in the so-called friendly relations between the leaders. And yes, nowadays we are back in a situation where Italy is, throughout the action, the diplomatic action of Giorgia Meloni, is trying to consolidating its domestic popular base, so kind of reframing her stance basically towards Italy, towards the US, and also towards the Europe as well. Sorry. Actually, as Giorgia Meloni said, and we saw before, the relations remains kind of excellent relations. I mean, it's not just a matter of personal relations with Donald Trump. I mean, the relations between Rome and Washington have been long-standing. Since the end of the Second World War, actually, Italy made clear the alliance with one of the greatest partners, which is US. So basically, the relations are something like structured and systemic relations made by many complementarities and interdependencies, coming to trade, coming to defense, coming also to technology. We shouldn't neglect that in Italy, we are hosting many American army bases. Also, Italy has been proving to be one of the most reliable partners within NATO for US. So it's very difficult at this point to say that the relations are leaving a dramatic turning point. I believe that anything we are seeing is just a matter of personality and rhetoric by President Trump.
And with this latest call by Meloni for relations with Washington to return to normal, would you say that's a show of statesmanship, or is she perhaps trying to contain a dispute that became just too personal?
Sorry, actually, after the G7, Meloni reacted for the first time by denying any false claim made by Donald Trump related to the selfie, the picture that supposedly our prime minister wanted to have with the American president. So it was the first time, really, that after many claims and many judgments by the American side, Giorgia Meloni stood up and reacted. And basically, there was a kind of two-day crisis in terms of consultation also within the Italian government. Our Prime Minister Antonio Tajani decided not to go to the US, but after that, also there was an important agreement among the parties, I mean, the leaders of our government, to attend the July 4th National Day in celebration in Rome. So basically, again, I think Meloni is trying to contain further the margin of crisis with Donald Trump. The line of the Italian government is pretty much clear. I mean, we do not like any kind of interference, and basically, Italy does not support any illegitimate action in terms of regional politics or international politics, which may have direct spillover on the stability and the economic of the Italian government. So basically, that was the casus belli between the two parties. I do believe that, as a matter of fact, since there are many complementarities and many positive points in these already excellent relations, I mean, unless Donald Trump will act not according to realpolitik and also common sense, the relations will go on. I mean, what really changes the relations between the leader to leader, I mean, relations. This will change, I believe.
And Valeria, you've mentioned that their Foreign Minister Tajani canceling his planned trip to the US. Would you say that act strengthened Italy's position in this spat of sorts, or made the diplomatic fallout harder to manage?
Well, it strengthened Italy's position with the European Union, but also related to the Italian popular base. Like the message was, we are not taking order and we are not at the service of anybody. We are aiming at protecting our national interests. So again, the Italian diplomacy took a strong stance, just rejecting the invitation and canceling the trip. But after that, as I mentioned, some positive signals came up. I mean, by saying that nothing really happened. I mean, we are ready to go on with the normal diplomatic relations, and again, the availability to attend the American National Day. As far as we know, all the channels of communication are still open between the Italian diplomacy and the American diplomacy, despite the fact that some spoken people of Donald Trump are sending some kind of negative messages by inferring that the American president aims to cut the relations with Italy. But so far, this is not the case, and it can be also kind of hard to achieve this goal, because as I mentioned, I mean, just if we look at bilateral trade between Italy and America, it stands at more than $150 billion. And it's not just a matter of Italian export to the US, but it's also a matter of the American export to Italy. So, I mean, cutting the relations will have a very detrimental effect on both sides, not just on Italy.
So, if I'm understanding correctly here, Italy wants close ties with Washington, but it also wants to defend its own sovereignty. Would you say that the Meloni government is now finding out how difficult that balance really is?
Actually, yes, and this is not just a recent point. I mean, this balance between the US, between the Italian national sovereignty, and also acting as a bridge maker towards the European Union has already shown some limits. For example, after the Israeli war on Gaza, because Italy at the very beginning did not take any stance and it just stood close to US and Israel. But then after a while, many protests also erupted in Italy and a much popular discontent was registered. And that was also a turning point for the Italian perception and the Italian approach, as well as along with the tariff imposed by US on European Union countries and on Italy. Italy was one of the least affected countries in the time, and Meloni was very active in trying to channeling the demands and actually the positions of US towards Brussels and vice versa. But again, now we are in this situation where it seems that the trust between parties is no longer so solid. And again, Italy finds herself in the position to defend its own national interest despite everything. On two sides now, I mean, towards Washington, but also towards some other countries within European Union.
And in the European sense, do you believe that Meloni can still be a bridge to Trump's Washington, or has this episode weakened that role enough so that she cannot perform it anymore?
From the, in order to be a bridge, you should be acknowledged as such by both parties. And from the American perspective, Meloni is no longer a bridge. As for today, then tomorrow we don't know what happened because Donald Trump is kind of unpredictable man. From the European Union, however, Meloni achieved something in terms of migration policy. I mean, recently they had a very important meeting, and also the Italian stances were accepted. I would like also to add something more, because we are heading towards a very important NATO meeting in Ankara in the beginning of July, and I do believe that there also we may see how big are the scratches between Italy and Washington, and eventually with regarding European Union as well, because many important topics will be put on the table, not just in terms of budget related to defense, but also in terms of a new stance of Europe in terms of defense and strategy after Trump claimed basically that US is no longer interested in supporting Europe defense and even within NATO. So, I mean, I think there is an interesting process going on. We will see many new developments in the short term.
Valeria, thank you very much for joining us on Primetime and offering your insight.
Pleasure.
All right, after a short break, we'll check in with our correspondents around the globe. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. London Climate Action Week is underway, with green energy, finance and jobs high on the agenda. But in Westminster, the climate debate is sharing the stage with growing questions over Labour's political future. A News' editor-in-chief sent us the latest.
Well, hello from day 3 of London Climate Action Week, where things are heating up in every sense all around the capital. A notable shift has happened, with meetings moving now from London's Guildhall to discussions at other venues, including events here at Parliament just behind me. Key themes today include green energy, climate finance, green skills, electrification, and how cities can deliver real emissions cuts whilst also creating jobs and growth. Well, this year's London Climate Action Week has already brought together tens of thousands of people across a multitude of events, making it one of the biggest climate gatherings anywhere in the world. And of course, it's all happening at the same time as the country and much of the world is gripped by the Keir Starmer versus Andy Burnham drama, all playing out in the building behind me. Mr. Burnham arrived here yesterday by train to be sworn in as an MP, and to many it looked much more like a coronation. Gushing compliments from senior Labour figures across social media, Mr. Burnham posing for large group photos with his Labour colleagues behind me. So it does look increasingly like Mr. Burnham is moving ever closer to becoming Britain's next Prime Minister. Those senior Labour figures continue to keep pledging their support, and at the same time, several potential challengers have now ruled themselves out of any leadership race. But there's also real signs of tension behind the scenes. Reports suggest that Starmer and Burnham have already met privately to discuss the possible transfer of power, with some sources describing discussions as difficult and at times frosty. A particular flashpoint appears to be defence spending, with Starmer determined to publish a major defence investment plan before he leaves office, while Andy Burnham's team, well, they want greater involvement in those decisions. So while climate leaders in London are focused on the long-term future of the planet, Westminster remains focused on an immediate question. If this is to be a coronation, then how smoothly can Labour manage the transition from Prime Minister Keir Starmer to Prime Minister Andy Burnham?
We just heard from Guy Schoen there, giving us the latest on the situation in the UK politically, but we also heard him mention London Climate Action Week, which he also attended. While he was there, he got the chance to speak to some of the attendees. Let's take a listen.
Well, Mr. Zakiroli, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us today. It's been a busy few days here at London Climate Action Week. I'm really interested in your role and the role of UNESCO in this whole piece, particularly when it comes to how cities can actually help take this fight against climate change.
Absolutely, yes. So for us as cities and network of UNESCO, of cities for inclusion and sustainability, these two words are really, really important. Because if you take inclusion, if you take sustainability, you merge the two, the outcome is justice that we need and people needs. And the attention, the focus that the cities can have is particularly to the people, the normal people that is living in our cities, in the cities like the beautiful London, but it's in today we are learning how much can be hot a city. Yes. And that is climate change. And we are leading the climate change, but we are living in a time in which we can tackle. Yes. With something that UNESCO is really underlying, trying not to leave behind nobody. Yes. We cannot allow ourselves to think measure or solution to the climate change, thinking that's just one can be left behind. No, absolutely not.
Well, Jean, it's been a very, very warm day already in London today. Things heating up.
Evidence of climate change.
Evidence, 40 degrees almost in London. Right. So we're very grateful, I think, both of us to be sheltering here in the AC of Raffles Hotel. I want to talk to you about business. Increasingly over the last few days, the role of business in climate action seems to have come more and more to the surface. And I know you've been involved in a number of discussions with CEOs here today, haven't you?
I have been. Look, if you look at COP, where we have to move to next is implementation. And if you think about all the public sector, what governments can do, I mean, we need stable policy, we need all sorts of things to de-risk. But if you look at the money out there, everyone says, where's the money? There is enough capital. The issue is bankable projects. And that's how we get to implementation. And if you look, just a couple of data points, if you add up all the multinational banks, they only add up to 2 trillion. Their entire balance sheets. If you add up what we need, it's over 4 trillion. And if you look at the private sector, it's 100 times that. When you look at pensions and funds and everything that's out there, we need the private sector in real partnerships if we're going to get to Paris, the goal of Paris. And without the private sector, that doesn't work. Now, the issue is, what does that mean? If you want a bankable project, you have to have a stable policy. You can't have a policy that makes something competitive one day, and the next day you've got a new prime minister or a new president, and it's not competitive the next.
Yes.
I personally have experiences with that. and your project goes underwater. So we're going to have stable policy. We're going to have governments help with things like the most restrictive pieces, demand. And the scarcest commodity in my mind is a long-term offtake agreement. If you don't have demand in a long-term offtake agreement, then why would I invest? So there are a whole combination of things, but really rich discussion last night, and this morning we had a very powerful discussion about what it would take to bring the private sector in.
An intense heat wave is continuing in Europe, with the French city of Bordeaux expecting highs of 46 degrees Celsius and Paris due to hit 41 degrees. 16 Italian cities are on red alert, and Germany is warning of very high temperatures as well. Ross Cullen reports.
Well, it is very uncomfortable here outside in Paris. There's no other way to describe it. Highs of 41 degrees Celsius here in the French capital. Highs of 46 degrees Celsius in the French city of Bordeaux. Even Brittany, which is in the northwest of France, the coldest and wettest part of the country, is 42 degrees, showing you that if it's that hot there, just how hot it is around the rest of the nation. We've had the hottest night ever in France. We've had the hottest day ever in France. There are thousands of schools closed across the country. Hundreds of railway services have been cancelled ahead of time, just in case a train were to break down without air conditioning. Really as a health issue. There have also been fatalities, unfortunately. At least 40 people have drowned in the past week after going into bodies of water to try to get some relief from the heat, getting into difficulties in rivers, getting caught in riptides in the sea as well. It's not just here in France where we are suffering from this heat dome of extremely high temperatures. Also neighbouring Germany, Belgium, Spain, 16 different red alerts have been issued in Italy and the United Kingdom as well, set to break records for temperatures there in June. Ross Cullen, A News, Paris.
A grouping of European nations is considering sending failed asylum seekers to return hubs in Rwanda and Uzbekistan. The controversial measure comes as the EU is seeking to adopt tougher rules on immigration. William Denslow reports from Brussels.
This returns hub policy is being championed by nations including the Netherlands and Greece. There are hopes from some that it could come into effect as early as 2027. It is a policy that's been tried by nations in the past. The UK, with its Rwanda policy, fell into political and legal troubles. Italy as well sought to use Albania as a return hub's destination. That too fell into legal hot water. Some member states are pushing for countries such as Uzbekistan or Rwanda to be used, citing their geographical location, not wanting nations too close to the borders of the EU, somewhere like Egypt or Libya, where there are concerns that could see an increase in human trafficking going forward. There are huge critics to this plan. UNHCR saying that some leaders are succumbing to populist rhetoric. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, says he's never seen any example of this policy working in practice. Looking at some of the facts and figures, well, according to the EU, irregular arrivals actually dropped over 25% last year, down to its lowest level in 2021. A concern, though, for some in the EU is that only roughly 1/3 of those that don't have the right to remain in the EU are being forced to actively leave. That is something they're seeking to address as part of a broader brush approach to migration policies. As an EU official describes it, to try and get the EU's house in order when it comes to better controlling who comes into the EU, who stays, and when required, who is ultimately forced to leave as well. William Denslow, Frey News, Brussels.
Azerbaijan's growing diplomatic weight is putting its role as a middle power back in focus. Now, policymakers and experts are asking how that influence can shape the next stage of its foreign policy.
Azerbaijan is strengthening its position in the international relations system and entering a new stage in its emergence as a middle power. Its foreign policy achievements in recent years, growing role in regional and global processes, as well as other factors, have been among the key elements shaping its middle power status.
Azerbaycan artık dünyada orta güce malik olan
Azerbaijan is now recognized as a middle power on the global stage, and companies from many countries are eager to cooperate with us across various sectors. Of course, we provide all companies, including foreign investors, with the necessary conditions within the framework of the law. At the same time, however, we must attract foreign companies to the sectors where they are needed most.
Ancak aynı zamanda harici şirketleri bize lazım olan sahalara biz celb etmeliyiz.
Following the full restoration of its territorial integrity and sovereignty, Azerbaijan has taken on a more active role in regional and international affairs. The country's growing profile as a middle power was the focus of discussions at the Azerbaijan as a Middle Power Conference, organised by the Centre of Analysis of International Relations.
The challenges for Azerbaijan now has, I think, twofold. One is external challenges. It's the effect of the wars which we have on the perimeter of the South Caucasus. Russian-Ukrainian war, American-Iranian conflict, how it will be resolved, what will be shape of the Middle East, what will be shape of the Eastern Europe, and because that affects the economic well-being of our region. Though we might get, maybe it sounds a bit cynical, but we can get the benefits of this situation because now the traffic is increasingly going from the Caspian Sea.
The main objective of the conference is to assess Azerbaijan's prospects for development as a middle power, discuss its foreign policy priorities, and further expand dialogue between the academic community and policymakers.
Azerbaijan is sending peacekeepers to some countries, so therefore this is a good example of a middle power which is essential for making stability in the region, creating new economic opportunities, new connectivity opportunities, and also we should mention the role of Azerbaijan in international platforms such as non-aligned movement, COP process, World Urban Forum, Turkic World, and many others, where Azerbaijan is chairing these organizations. Azerbaijan is bringing new agenda items. Azerbaijan is creating new dynamic within these organizations, and therefore these organizations greatly benefit from Azerbaijan's diplomacy.
Experts believe that energy diplomacy, transport and connectivity projects, particularly contributions to the development of the Middle Corridor, are enhancing Azerbaijan's regional and global significance.
Iran is preparing for a week-long farewell to Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who was killed in February during Israeli-US air raids. His funeral comes amid tensions over a 60-day ceasefire deal. Tura Shiralilu reports.
Reporting from downtown Tehran, one of the main venues of holding Muharram morning rituals, marking centuries-old anniversary of killing Prophet Muhammad's grandson. Iranian officials are planning a massive farewell for the former supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who was killed in Israeli-US airstrikes in February. The funeral and burial will begin on 4th of July and continue for a week. Events are being planned in multiple cities, including here in Tehran and the religious cities of Qom and Mashhad, as well as in neighboring Iraq, home to a Shia Muslim majority population. The government has announced a one-day nationwide public holiday in addition to 2 days of holidays in Tehran and 2 days in the provinces that will host the funeral events. As millions of mourners are expected to attend across the country, restrictions on domestic and international flights will be imposed, reportedly for logistical and security reasons. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei led the post-revolution Iran for nearly 4 decades and shaped its domestic and foreign policies more than any other political figure of his generation. His burial rituals are both a tribute to his legacy and a demonstration of post-war political resilience, which resulted in the leadership of his son, Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei. Amid news of funeral preparations grabbing the domestic media headlines, diplomatic efforts between Iran and the US continue. Officials from both sides have been visiting regional countries to gather and maintain support. Iran's Speaker of Parliament and Chief Negotiator, Mohammad Baqir Ghalibaf, traveled to Oman, while President Masoud Pezeshkian visited Pakistan on Tuesday. Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio is touring countries in the Persian Gulf. According to local media, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is expected to visit Iraq on Sunday to discuss the Iran-US memorandum as well as former leaders' funeral plans. Turash Shiralilu from downtown Tehran, Foreign News.
An Afghan Taliban delegation has held talks with European Union officials in Brussels for the first time since the group returned to power in Afghanistan. The meeting has sparked criticism from rights groups, but the EU says the discussions are aimed at handling the return of failed Afghan asylum seekers from Europe. Tamim Bahiz has the details in Kabul.
A Taliban delegation led by Foreign Ministry spokesperson Abdul Kahar Balkhi traveled to Brussels at the invitation of the European Union. It was the first such meeting between Taliban representatives and EU officials in Brussels since the group took control of Afghanistan nearly 5 years ago. The meeting was held behind closed doors. The EU has not recognized the Taliban government, but says limited talks are needed to arrange the return of Afghans who have no legal right to stay in Europe. The Afghan Foreign Ministry said the talks covered wider issues, including consular services, confidence-building measures, and problems facing rejected Afghan asylum seekers in Europe. The visit has been strongly criticized by rights groups and some European politicians who say it could legitimize the Taliban and put Afghans at risk. Belgium issued the Afghan delegation a one-day visa restricting its presence to Belgian territory only. The Taliban delegation says it hopes the visit will open the door to further engagement based on mutual respect and shared interests. Tamim Bahiz in Kabul, A News.
Kazakhstan is strengthening its ties with Europe at a time when Brussels is looking for secure sources of critical minerals, energy, and transport routes. Kazakh president's visit to Brussels has put that partnership firmly back in focus. Fariza Kalimurzina filed this earlier.
Deals valued at $12 billion have been signed during a visit to Brussels by Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. A major focus of his talks with European leaders was critical raw materials. Tokayev said Kazakhstan is ready to become a reliable partner for Europe in the supply of strategic minerals, and the country can provide 21 of the 34 raw materials on the European Union's list of critical resources. To strengthen that partnership, Kazakhstan is proposing a number of agreements aimed at securing long-term demand for raw materials, while supporting industries that process them domestically. Tokayev said the approach would help expand production within the country instead of exporting raw materials for processing abroad. He also said plans are being discussed to create a regional research center for rare earth metals. The talks in Brussels also focused on energy and transport links. Tokayev noted that Kazakhstan accounted for nearly 13% of crude oil supplies delivered to the European market over the past year. The two sides also discussed the development of the Trans-Caspian international transport route known as the Middle Corridor, which links Europe and Asia. One major deal that was signed will see Kazakhstan buy up to 50 Airbus planes to add to Air Astana's fleet. The order is estimated to exceed 7 billion euros or nearly $8 billion. Highlighting Kazakhstan's importance to Europe, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said trade has more than doubled over the past decade. Tokayev described the current state of relations as the strongest in the history of EU-Kazakhstan relations. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Well, that's our show. Thank you so much for watching, and join us again tomorrow. From all of us here at A News, have a very nice evening.